Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our January 2023 meeting. I'm Alex Albanak. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Research Administration at Johns Hopkins University and co-chair of the Federal Demonstration Partnership. On behalf of my fellow co-chair, Michelle Masucci, Vice Chancellor for Research and Economic Development at the University System of Maryland, and Dick Seligman, Interim Executive Director of FDP, welcome to our meeting. I'm so pleased that so many of you could join us for this meeting. We have an exciting program, and particularly I'd like to thank Barbara Gardner of Tufts University. She's the chair of our program committee. I'd also like to thank all of the committee members for the huge amount of time and effort contributed to make this such a strong program. And I think you will agree after attending many of these sessions offered this week. We're excited to let you know that we will be returning to in-person this coming May. We're really looking forward to reconnecting in person and being able to have the time, some time dedicated to our working groups, demonstrations, and key initiatives, as well as to attend our program in person for the first time since the COVID pandemic began. Meeting details for this meeting, as well as upcoming meetings, are posted on our website. We'll also be providing you a few more details regarding our plans for May during our committee updates later in the week on Wednesday. Now, as a reminder, there's still time to register for this meeting. So if you have colleagues from your institutions that are interested, they are welcome to join us. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge some of the significant work that's taken place since our last meeting in September. And first, we're very excited about our new NIH data management and sharing pilot that's being developed to address the needs, everybody's needs for the final data management and sharing guidance that's been adopted by NIH. We'll be sharing information on this in just a few minutes during our open plenary. Also, as you hear each time we meet, we're very interested in increasing our volunteer participation. We formed a work group early in the phase to provide recommendations for how to maximize our engagement. We'll get recommendations on how best to engage our volunteers. And first we sent out a survey, and we've actually used that survey as a means for identifying interested people for current open positions. Well, this is ongoing. The work of FDP participants is the key to this organization's success. And to further our objectives, enhancing our volunteerism, FDP is creating a tool that will allow us to consolidate all of our volunteer opportunities so that people can just easily view openings on the various committees and express their interest by just simply logging into the FDP website. Sarah, could you please post the 2 slides that our membership committee provided for us for a little bit more details? Okay, great. So the first slide includes instructions on how to access the system. So essentially you have to log into your personal profile. If you're not familiar, if you don't remember your password, you can click and reset that. These slides, I'm not going to walk through each one, but these slides will be made available following our presentation so you can access them. And next slide, Sarah. And so we very kindly, our sub-awards committee and our sub-award template working group have agreed to help us pilot this tool. So they've listed their, you can see there's substantial opportunities under sub-awards, and the 2 groups will talk about this, about the opportunities a little bit more during the sub-awards and expanded clearinghouse session on Tuesday. So stay tuned, and please, let us know. This is new, so please be patient, and in the true spirit of FDP, please provide feedback on your experience in using this volunteer portal. Also, we continue to make significant strides in developing a framework for increasing engagement with our federal partners. We formed a federal engagement working group, and that one of their recommendations and what we've been striving to do is to ensure continuing dialogue with our federal partners about issues and initiatives that are important to them. And you'll see that during this meeting that we have identified many issues of high importance to both the federal and the institution members. For instance, we're going to have quite a comprehensive federal agency update session. And following that, we're highlighting NASA's open science and data policies that will take place during our final plenary of the day. In another initiative, you've heard about our need to update and expand our website. And so we're currently working on a prototype for the new website. And thanks to the hard work of our communications committee and our consultant Vanguard, you should see the fruits of their labor very soon. So up and coming anytime. And finally, we just want you to know that we're nearing the conclusion of our search for our new executive director. And Michelle is actually going to provide more details. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle now. Michelle?
Thank you, Alex, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to be with you here this morning and once again to welcome a large number of our members to this virtual meeting. As Alex said, it's our last virtual meeting before we have an in-person meeting in Washington, D.C. I'm really excited that we're going to be back together again, and I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody in that setting. It'll be, I believe, the first in-person meeting of this phase. So in some sense, we get to sort of reboot the FDP in person for phase 7. I want to thank everyone of our volunteers who helps us to move the FDP forward. And in particular, again, I want to thank Barb Gardner and all of the volunteers who are involved in organizing the plans for the meetings. It takes an enormous amount of time to do that, and they're very diligent about ensuring that we attend to all of the details that are needed to bring our guests and bring the program to you in this format. And in addition to that, we have volunteers who support the FDP by taking notes, ensuring that the materials that we present in these virtual meetings and the videos in particular are posted. They're often posted within the same week of the meetings and sometimes even in the same day or two from the meeting. So it's really quite an enormous job that they do to make all of this material available to you as a reference moving forward. One of the changes to our meeting format in this particular meeting is based on your feedback to us from a survey about what's going well and what you would like to see different in the virtual meetings. So we have moved our virtual meetings into 3-day meeting instead of the 4 days that we had been holding in the past virtual meetings. And how we got that done while preserving the content in the schedule it's a miracle of some sort of the planning committee. But what we decided to do was to work on having concurrent sessions for things that are more specialized and then leave open a number of plenaries that everyone can attend in common. So take a very close look at the schedule to make sure that you're tracking which components you want to participate in during the concurrent sessions. And then, of course, today, everything is going to be open to all at the same time. As Alex noted, we're very pleased that Dick Sullivan continues to serve as the interim executive director for the FDP. Honestly, he has been invaluably helpful to keeping the organization moving. He's actually out of the country and unable to be here for this particular meeting, but he will, when he returns, help us to provide transition for our new executive director once our final selection is completed. As Alex noted, we're at the conclusion of our process. We want to thank you all for your inputs throughout, including having provided nominations or self-nominating. And I wanted to give a special thank you to the search committee members, including Melissa Korf, David Robinson, Stephanie Brock, Jamie Sprague, and Vonda Durer for their hard work. And in particular, they kind of pushed right into the end of 2022, a whole series of meetings to work on both identifying a short list and a process for how they would make recommendations. We're in the final stages of considering finalists, and we hope to have a recommendation within the next few weeks. So we are nearing the finish line and very excited to be moving forward with a specific candidate in the near future. As always, we wish to highlight our continuing relationship with the National Academies through the Division of Policy and Global Affairs, and specifically with GWIR, the Government University Industry Research Roundtable, which has played an important convening role for the FDP all throughout its history. We're very grateful for the ongoing support that we received from Tom Arison, who's the program director with the Division of Policy and Global Affairs. He's been now serving as the senior advisor to the Federal Demonstration Partnership since Susan Sloan retired. We're also going to be giving a very warm welcome to the new GWIR board director, Michael Nestor. He's actually joining our faculty forum tomorrow at 4 p.m. to discuss his vision for the future of GWIR and hopefully for lots of interactions between the FDP, GWIR, and the national academies. So it is the faculty forum, but all are welcome. Please join us for our fireside chat. It'll be an open conversation with Michael to talk about what his vision is and how we might work together. He joined GWIR with experience as a scientific engagement lead at JLabs in Washington, D.C., a AAAS S&T fellow in advanced scientific computing research, and president of SNAPTEM. We hope that everyone will provide him with a warm welcome at our session tomorrow. That's not the only highlight from the FDP meetings. There's so much going on. Of course, we have our opening demonstration of the NIH data management pilot project and our federal agency updates today. There's a NASA update on open science and data policies later on this afternoon at 4:30 Eastern Time. Tomorrow, we start with a plenary on safeguarding the U.S. research enterprise in terms of transparency, integrity, and reciprocity. It's a plenary session that we hope you'll be able to join. Then we start our concurrent sessions. So from 1 to 2:15 and from 2:30 to 3:45, we have concurrent sessions. And again, please look at the program carefully to decide which you want to attend. We cap off the day with our faculty forum, and everybody is invited to the faculty happy hour, which happens at 5:30 Eastern Time. On Wednesday, we conclude our meetings with 2 sets of concurrent sessions, and we will have an extended committee updates session at 2 o'clock, where we'll be hearing from our various committees on the progress that they've been making, and we close out our FDP and kick off our countdown to our in-person meetings that are going to happen at 3:30 on Wednesday with Dr. Alicia Nodler, who is the head of the Office of Integrative Activities at the NSF. And she's going to be talking about all of the efforts that we're involved in making our work accessible to broader audiences. So I think we have a really exciting program. I hope you agree, and we look forward to seeing you throughout the meetings. Let me turn this over to Christy Keene, Senior Director of Research and Finance at the University of Chicago, who is going to introduce all of our panelists and get us started on our opening plenary. Christy, take it away.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm really excited that we are kicking off the January FDP meeting with this plenary session about the NIH data management and sharing policy that goes into effect on Wednesday, 2 days from now. As Michelle said, my name is Christy Keene. I am joined today by my colleagues Melissa Korf from Harvard Medical School and Jim Luther from Yale. We are so grateful to have with us today Michelle Bowles. Michelle is the director of the Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration and co-chair of the Finance, Audit, and Costing Committee. Michelle has been a champion to the research community to help all of us successfully implement this policy. She has convened and encouraged her NIH colleagues to participate in the pilot, and we have had the chance to sit at the virtual table with NIH on a weekly basis to develop the pilot. And while some of us might be a little anxious for the next few weeks and what they look like, we are very excited to get things started. So thank you, Michelle, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Christy. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Jim, for being partners with us in this pilot effort. And I want to thank Kristen Taw for joining us as well, who serves as my deputy director and will be here to answer questions with me. So if we can get started with the slide deck. I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend and are ready to get started with the data management and sharing policy. Like Christy said, we only have 2 days to go, and I promise you the next day after the implementation, the world will still turn and we will still be right there with you, turning with you, I promise. So first slide, please. As you all know, we have our data management and sharing policy that goes into effect on January 25th. And we outline the requirements here, and I'm not going to go through those because you guys are very aware of what those requirements are. But I do want to make sure that we highlight the fact that the scope, of course, is to the scope is for all NIH supported research that generates scientific data. We've tried to be very clear in our policies and in FAQs as to what activity codes those apply to. And of course, if you have any questions, I'm going to say this often, please reach out early and often, and we will be here. We have a whole host of NIH colleagues that will be right here to walk you guys through whatever you need to know and understand as we get started. We have elements of a plan. We do not have a format or what we would call a standard form just yet. And the reason why we don't have a standard form just yet is because we are excited to develop that standard form with our colleagues, our FDP colleagues through this demonstration pilot. And so NIH is making sure as we talk through all of the standard elements that we all believe that we want to have accounted for. We are being very clear that we do not have a standard form yet, and we will not have a standard form until the pilot is complete, and we have a true partnership with our colleagues. So we do have the elements of the plan, which is the data type, the related tools and software and code, standards, data preservation, access timelines, access distribution and reuse considerations, and of course, oversight of data management and sharing. The timeline is when data is to be shared is no later than the time of the associated publication or end of the award for unpublished data, whichever comes first. Next slide. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the process and the pre-award. And these are areas that I assure you within NIH, we have the grants policy and compliance formats. We have pre-award and we have post-award. So I'm going to walk you through the pre-award slide just a bit here. So the plan is submitted at the time of the application. And then the plan is assessed by the program official at just in time. If there are additional information that's needed, that information will come through just in time. And then that plan will be accepted and becomes a term and condition of the award. The one thing that I want to make sure of is that folks understand that for the standard plans, they are not going to be peer reviewed where the data management sharing is not the focus or not integral to the project design that's outlined in the funding opportunity announcement. And I really want to make that clear because one of the things that we've been very diligent about is making certain that our program officials know that whatever information that you want in that NOFO, in the plan, it has to go in the NOFO, in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, because that's the only way our applicants are going to be able to see what the requirements are, understand what those requirements are, and comply with the submission. So that's very, very important. The plan will be assessed by the program official, and I think that that's something that we wanted to really highlight here, because the program officials will work with the principal investigators and faculty to resolve any challenges and finalize plans based on those programmatic assessments. We have a group of subject matter experts that have developed an assessment tool that will be used by the program officials. And it's a recommended tool. It's not, of course, required, but we want to make sure that our program officials have a criteria by which they base their assessments on. So there has been one that has been developed. And the program officials, along with the principal investigators, will agree on the plan, and then the plan will be resubmitted at just in time through the AOR. And I think it's really important that the authorized organizational representative is outlined here, because the one question that we've consistently received is whether or not the program official will be allowed to accept a plan from the PI apart from the business office. And the answer to that question is no. The just-in-time standards remain in place. And so those plans, once they're agreed upon, will be submitted through the AOR. But I think the message here on this slide really is to show that the program officials will work with the principal investigators to develop and resolve challenges and issues and finalize those plans so that everyone is on the same page. Next slide. Through post-award, we have an approved plan. We talked about the fact that that becomes a term and condition of the award. And then, of course, recipients will submit the progress report through of the approved DMS plan and the research performance progress report, RPPR, both in annual, interim, and final. If there are changes made prior to the RPPR or after the RPPR is submitted, where there's a new scientific direction, a change in the data repository, or the timeline revision changes, then that would invoke prior approval, and the prior approval will be submitted through our standard prior approval requirements. NIH will continue to monitor compliance on an annual basis. And then, of course, as I said, if things change before or after that RPPR is submitted, then we will work with the recipients to make those changes. One of the things that we've heard is that folks are really concerned about, what if we do have a change, and what if we do need to, make a change in the data repository or change the timeline revision, will that be allowed? And I want to just encourage you all to remember, the goal is to work with our recipients to develop compliance standards. And we are all working in this space together. And I know that there's some concern that there may be a standard or requirements that are different for each IC, institute, or center, that NIH will, require compliance in ways that the community might not be familiar with. And I'm going to say that is why we are doing the pilot, because we want to make sure that we develop those standards together and understand where those pain points are. And once we identify where the pain points are, I think I said before, we're going to recognize that we might have to do some shifting. And where that shifting needs to be, then we can do that just to make sure that our recipients are able to, deposit the data and make the data available, and get to the end game of just promoting research. And that is the end game. And I think that you all know that NIH has been at the table with you all from the beginning, understanding that there are some true challenges that we will face in the area of budgets and that kind of thing. But understanding that we have phases of the pilot, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, where we will look at those challenges and identify ways to approach them so that recipients can remain compliant, or so that NIH can look at how we can adjust our standards. Next slide, please. So in an effort to reduce administrative burden, I was really excited. I've been with FDP for a number of years. I won't go into the exact number, but and I probably wasn't 12 when I started, but I will say this. We hadn't had a demonstration in a pilot demonstration in a very, very long time. And one of the things that I remember about when I first joined FDP is how we would partner together to come up with some really collaborative, easy wins to help the recipients understand some of the policies that we were implementing, as well as us understanding the pain points. And we had a few really good wins. One was the federal cash transaction report that it took us almost 50 years to get rid of it. But because we partnered together with you guys and identified all of the challenges, we were able to chip away, and we got rid of that form. And it has made life easier, and it'll get easier as we continue to phase out. So as I was thinking about all the challenges that we had heard about the data sharing and management plan, it really kind of dropped into my spirit that we really needed to try to do a pilot and to see how we could engage the community and identify those pain points and work out those wrinkles so that we could, all get in this space together and make this a win-win for everyone. So FDP, I approached a couple of colleagues, and FDP said, yes, this is something that we would love to do. And I'm really excited to have Christy as my co-chair, who pushes us along. And then Jim and Melissa, you guys know them. They don't play about it either. We get on calls and we are jumping into the meat and guts of where the challenges may be. So we are partnering and engaging with our institutes and centers from our program offices, which has been an amazing partnership having them at the table. We have our Office of Extramural Research subject matter experts that have been really helping us understand kind of some of the baseline thoughts of the policies and helping us understand where the assessments are, what's recommended, and and then we can delineate what's required. And that's been a really good partnership. And then, of course, our colleagues within the Office of Science and Policy, we work very closely with them as well. And then, of course, my opera compliance colleagues. The goal of the part of the demonstration pilot is to generate a greater consistency in the DMS plan requirements across the institutes and centers and programs. Because what we were seeing is there were ICs that may have been putting out some policies, or what we would call policies and what they would call instructions on what their plan, what they wanted the plan to look like for their research priorities. And so one of the things that we did was we talked to a few of the ICs and said, we want to get together and we want you to be a part of this and identify that consistency and let's stop putting out instructions so that we can gain understanding through all of the elements that we have thus far and determine whether we need additional elements or not, just so that we would decrease the burden and the anxiety that we're placing on the community. Because if you imagine 24 different institutes and centers and then different programs within those different institutes and centers, that's something that I know the community was really concerned about. So we have an opportunity to mitigate the administrative burden for our researchers and the associated DMS plans and the development and implementation of them. So we're really looking forward to having this partnership, and we are doing this in 2 phases. Next slide, please. The first phase of the FDP pilot is to identify plan templates. And we have 2 templates that we've selected for testing. We're really excited about that. And one of the things that we are trying to do is to make sure that we take under advisement all of the institutes and centers and what we believe they may want to see and to collect in their plans. As well as we still have some discussions underway with the DMP tool folks, which is going to be an exciting part of phase 1 as well. And the purpose, again, is just to make sure we generate that consistency across the ICs and across the programs and try to relieve or minimize the burden on our recipients. And I know that FDP, my colleagues have reached out to institutions to gather participants, and we've gotten over 60 interested so far. And Jim and Melissa and Christy will talk to you a little bit about that after my presentation. Next slide. Then we also have the second phase, which is going to be the really fun phase, is the costing policies. And those are the areas where I know we're going to have a great deal of participation and generating a lot of discussion. May require us to make some changes or offer some changes in other areas and policies so that we can make certain that we provide coverage to our recipients in this area. But we want to identify ways to establish common cost principles, identify different types of costs that may be required, look at this single budget line item and to see how we can make that work or unpack it so that we can identify ways to track the costs without placing, again, burden on the recipients and hiding, or I wouldn't say hiding, but putting personnel costs in areas that it shouldn't be in, because that could cause cause challenges for us, even in indirect costs. So we want to make sure that we don't put our recipients at risk there. Determine ways and how to identify additional unforeseen costs that might not be known upfront, just so we could meet the spirit of the DMS policy without breaking the system. And then determining the feasibility of placing costs, again, like I said, in that single cost category, and having them filter throughout the budget line items, but using justifications and other measures to track it versus bundling it in one single line item. And so many other things that I know will come up and that we've heard about thus far. Next slide. So I just provided a slide here where you can obtain additional information. Our colleagues in OER have done a great job setting up the website. We have a FAQ, which includes a lot of different things. Kristen and I are still working on reviewing some FAQs that we are going to clear and get back and put out on the website as well. There are some general DMS questions that should definitely go to the sharing at nih.gov. And then budgeting and costing questions should go to grants policy at nih.gov. And with that, I'll turn this back over to Cindy. Thank you for your time. I mean, Christy, I'm sorry, Christy.
That's okay. Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so let's see, this morning, I wanted to walk through the logistics of the pilot and what it means to participate. And it's not too late to participate. And it's very important to us that we have a diverse sample of institutions. So I'll talk about the institutional expectations of participating in the pilot, and then I'll turn it over to Melissa. Next slide, please. So what does it mean to be a participating institution? We ask that you provide some demographic and contact information. Who do we get in touch with along the way as we have questions? And what does your institution look like? I mentioned we want a diverse sample. That's really important, that the policy and the templates meet the needs of everyone, not just a few institutions. Participating means that you agree to public posting of your organization's name as a participating member of the pilot. You'll be asked to provide reports of institutional data at least quarterly. And then we ask that you strongly encourage PIs to participate and use the templates. And there's a target of at least 25% of competing submissions. Use one of the pilot templates. We're not saying you have to use template 1 or template 2, just ask that you use one of the templates and again, target 25% submission. So FDP, we will provide you with a template email that you can customize as you wish for your institution. This email can be sent to PIs to encourage them to participate. And the PIs will not be asked to complete more than one plan. So if you use template 1, you don't also have to submit template 2. It's just one template that has to be submitted. And we ask that you participate for the full 12-month period of the pilot. Like Michelle said, this pilot it's multi-phase. So there's the templates, which are obviously very important, and then the costing side of things. So it's not going to be, we'll have everything we need to know after, 2 weeks from now. It will be ongoing, and we expect that if you would like to participate, you do so for the full 12 months. Next slide, please. So what does the institution provide? For those that have completed the Qualtrics survey, you've already provided some of that. That's the demographic information to make sure we have a diverse sample of institutions participating. Additionally, there will be quarterly reports on the total number of proposals submitted to NIH within that reporting period. And which template did you use? Was it version 1 or version 2? And then for each proposal, using one of the templates, to which IC was the application submitted, the award mechanism, and the total dollar amount requested over the competing period. And finally, the reporting mechanism it's anticipated to be an Excel spreadsheet that we will provide to those participating institutions. We understand that, this is a big ask to provide all this data, kind of do the legwork of encouraging participation, but ultimately, we need your help to be successful and determine if which of these templates or which parts of these templates make sense for PIs, and additionally, which ones are helpful to the ICs. It is, there's more than one seat at this table, so we want to make sure that we're getting the information we need and looking at that along with our NIH colleagues. So I will hand it over to Melissa.
So what we're envisioning is we're collecting some of that institutional data that Christy mentioned, as well as critically some feedback from the PI and or the individual who prepared the data management and sharing plan. We know that sometimes those might not necessarily be the same person, or the contact PI might delegate that responsibility to another key personnel or something of that nature. So we're also trying to be very mindful of making sure that we are really thoughtful about these questions and don't ask too many. So this is still a little bit in draft form, soliciting some additional feedback on making sure that we've kind of hit on the right questions, but aren't overburdening a PI and asking too many questions. But we want to be able to understand from the PI's perspective, which format did they use to help us place in context some of the rest of their answers. In an ideal world, we would ask them to maybe attach their submitted data management sharing plan or provide a link. If you use something like DMP tool to generate your plan, that might allow you to publish in a way that you could share via a link. Ideally, if we can get some structured list for this, we might ask about research discipline, the individual's familiarity with the policy, general data management sharing best practices, whether or not they've submitted a data management sharing plan previously, if they had assistance from others, or if they use tools like DMP tool to prepare the plan. Next slide, please. Critically, in hours, how long would they estimate that it took them to complete the plan? And how much time would they estimate others spent in assisting them completing that? How would they rate the usability of the form? Were there any data points that were included but not relevant for their field? And then the converse, were there any data points that weren't included, but they really wanted to be able to provide to make the plan stronger? And then will they need to adjust the standard practices in their lab in order to implement the data management and sharing plan as proposed? So we know that there are some labs, talking to our faculty, where maybe now it's just an exercise of describing some of the best practices that they already have in place, whereas other labs are a little bit more concerned about needing to make changes to their standard practices. And as I said, we're going to make every effort to structure this data collection to provide the least additional burden for the PI. We know that we don't want to be adding administrative burden in our pursuits of reducing it, but also that it will help with actually getting the responses that we're looking for. What we're envisioning is a smart, brief Qualtrics questionnaire that could be shared with PIs who agree to participate. Next slide. So I know we have a lot of questions about timeline, and those of you who had expressed interest in participating in the pilot will remember that you were invited to a meeting to discuss some of these points and gather feedback just a little over a week ago, and we're still going through some of the feedback that we collected and are still continuing to receive as a result of that meeting. And so we're hoping to put a lock on the final institutional expectations and a pilot participation agreement, which is the document that we would ask institutions to sign in order to kind of formally participate in the pilot in a week or two, which is when we would begin to initiate the pilot in earnest. We're also working on publishing a pilot website where we'll one-stop shop for all kinds of things like the templates, the data collection instruments, the template email to a PI, slides, all of the information that you would need to feel really confident in implementing the pilot at your institution. And as Michelle said, we're really excited that we're continuing discussions with DMP Tool about whether it will be possible to make the pilot templates available through that tool as well. They will definitely be available as fillable PDF forms that we'll make available on that pilot website. But hopefully we'll be able to successfully work out a collaboration with DMP Tool as well. Jim and Christy, anything else you guys want to add to our discussion of next steps? And then we also set up, next slide, Sarah. We've also set up an email address, NIH DMS pilot at thefdp.org. So if you've got questions, concerns, suggestions, something that you think of after this session is over and you want to reach out to the Christy, Jim, and I that are working on organizing the pilot, you can use that email address and reach us with your questions. I think we are ready to switch over to the Q&A portion of the session. And just a comment, I see that there are some folks that are adding questions into the chat. And if everyone could please be entering questions in the Q&A, that will help us try to make sure that we're answering everything, because we'll have all the questions in one place.
Melissa, some are saying that the Q&A isn't available to them.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I'm trying to get it through I was trying to get through as many as I could while you guys were talking.
Michelle, are there any that you've answered that that are worth talking through? I know you answered them, but there are some that are in particular you'd like to read the question, the answer?
It's challenging because what it looks like is that after I answered it, it goes away.
It should go into the answered.
I was going to.
You see a tab at the top? Yep.
Yeah. So one of the questions that you answered in a typed answer, Michelle, that I thought would be really useful just for everyone to hear was just about the just-in-time process. I know there's a little bit of angst about that, and there was a question about, would a PI always hear? Would they only hear if there are changes? And then, of course, to reinforce the involvement of the AOR in that process of submitting the data management and sharing plan, if it needs to be revised.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? I think folks think maybe you would always hear from the program official, and you will not hear from the program official regarding DMS. So this is going to be under our all-inclusive just-in-time. DMS will be one part of it. But if there is not a concern or a challenge or issue that the program official has, or questions that the program official has with the plan, then you won't hear from the program official related to the DMS. And then one should assume that that plan was accepted, the award will be made. If in fact, and of course, if there are concerns or challenges or questions, then the program official will, it will be in the just in time, and there will be a reach out to the PI to work with them to make sure that they resolve. Because the goal really, and I want to make sure we say that the goal really is to resolve the challenges with the plan so that it can be acceptable to both the PI and the institute or center's program official. And that might differ depending on the research disciplines, but for the most part, I think what we have to realize is that you all should not be nervous nor worried. I do believe that with the assessment tool that's been developed that will help navigate and move the POs into a similar space of what they're looking for, I don't think that there will be a problem with that at all. And again, there might be some challenges where, you have to go back and forth just a little bit to get where both are comfortable. But I think we have those kinds of discussions. The program officials have these kinds of discussions with their POs or their PIs a lot. And so I don't think that there will be much difference there.
Thanks, Michelle. We're seeing in the chat that participants can't see the questions. So as Melissa said, perhaps we can read some of the questions that you've already answered and provide those responses live. So there's a number of questions about the RPPR, and will there be a designated location within the RPPR to comment on activities related to data management sharing? And will the RPPR be updated to ask specific questions?
So the RPPR will be updated. We are going to be putting in a change request. We will be working with the OER subject matter experts to develop those questions, make sure that those that information in the RPPR is could stand a test of audit and us being able to enforce or comply. So once we work with them, we'll get that in there, and then we'll work with OMB, bless you, Christy, to make sure that those that the additional information is put into the RPPR so that folks can have a spot. Right now, there is not one. We have not updated it yet.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm seeing a number of questions about the pilot, things like timeline, can institutions that aren't necessarily FDP member institutions participate? What does our diversity look like so far? And so just to provide a little bit more information on that, we are working as fast as our little fingers can type to try to get everything ready to launch phase 1. Like I said, I think we're hoping to have the final participation agreement done within a week or two, so that then we can provide that to all of the institutions that have expressed interest in participation, and they can make sure they vet it with all of the stakeholders as necessary at their institution. We anticipate needing to give about 2 weeks for that process to happen. So official kickoff date, 3 to 4 weeks from now for phase 1, just to make sure that everyone has enough time to feel like really fully confident about what they've got going on in agreeing to participate. The institutions that have expressed interest in participating have already been given the opportunity to see the pilot templates and some other materials, and are providing us with some feedback that we're working on making sure that we're incorporating. In terms of, do they have to be a FDP institution to participate? We have from one of our participating ICs a very strong interest in involving some of the cancer centers. And so we're working on performing some targeted outreach to some of the more mid-sized cancer centers. Christy, Jim, and I, we recognize that we're not necessarily representative of all, our institutions are not necessarily representative of all institutions around the country. And so we're trying to make sure that we're targeting some of the smaller cancer centers in that outreach. And if we are successfully able to make the pilot templates available via DMP tool, those would then become available to anyone who uses DMP tools. So we also recognize that once the templates are out there, it becomes a little bit harder to control who decides to use them. But in terms of formal signed on participants, it would probably be these cancer center invited participants and FDP member institutions. And then once we're able to get phase 1 kicked off, we'll be able to think in a lot more detail about the timeline for phase 2, but just anticipate that phase 2 won't begin until that 4-week period, at least from now, that we're able to get phase 1 kicked off. In looking at, and I know that some institutions are continuing to fill out our demographic Qualtrics, but we do have a pretty good representation of state and private and educational institutions and research institutions. And I think we do have a pretty nice representation. It may not be perfect. And these are just institutions that have expressed interest. We're not asking them to make a formal final commitment to participate until we're able to actually provide that participation agreement for them to review, and they make sure that they have all of the logistics. There was one question in the chat regarding how we envision an institution might collect some of the data. And, you know, Christy, Jim, and I have discussed this a little bit, and, you know, we're hoping for some feedback from other institutions that are interested in participating. I think just judging based on the three of our institutions, it's probably not going to be possible to necessarily run a system report for the type of data that we're looking for. There may need to be some manual component to the collection, which is why we're really trying to kind of minimize the data points that we're looking for. You know, certainly in terms of, did you use this template or this template? That's not a data point that most grant management systems are collecting. And so there may need to be a little bit of a manual component. And then the PI feedback, again, we're hoping that will be as brief as we can manage, but still get meaningful feedback. Qualtrics questionnaire that we could send via email, make available on a website, so that we can make sure that we're getting that to folks who use one of the pilot templates so that they can share their feedback with us. In terms of the pilot logistics questions, anyone see anything else that I missed?
No, there was one good question that I thought that I think everybody would benefit from hearing, because it's one that's kind of nuanced, where it's talking about if there is an adjustment of standards that NIH driven, that NIH is driven, that changes the elements of our plan. So in other words, if the recipient has to make an adjustment to one of their standards and that change is driven by an NIH decision, would the plan require prior approval from the applicant institution? And so one of the things that we're saying is that we're going to be working back and forth. That'll be a back and forth discussion between the program official and the principal investigator. And once that plan, those changes that NIH has either stated needs to be made, or the PI and the PO come to an agreement that it can be made, then that will resolve the challenge, and then it'll be submitted back through to NIH by the AOR. So the submission from the AOR indicates that the applicant institution or the recipient institution at that point will have made those changes, and it would be acceptable. So it doesn't need to, no other prior approval needs to take place, except for if after the accepted plan has been received, accepted, and made a term and condition of the award, and the recipient then changes something after that, whether it be at the time of the RPPR or after, then that's what would invoke the prior approval requirement. And then I put down the three main reasons why a prior approval requirement would need to be submitted.
Thanks, Michelle. There's a couple questions regarding pilot participation. So if you did not complete the original Qualtrics survey, but you are interested in participating, if you don't have the link to that survey, you can email the email address that we shared on the slide and let us know your interest, and we can resend that link to you. If you completed the survey but haven't received follow-up, it means that we're still kind of getting the data, making sure we have a representative sample, and we will be reaching out to encourage you to participate.
And just because we're acknowledging that there are some issues with the Q&A, we're going to do everything we can to make the typed answered question and answers available after the session with some of the session materials. If there are questions that we don't get to today, we'll also try to do the same thing. Maybe if we're willing to talk about element 6 of the data management and sharing plan, there's a question here. So element 6 is the oversight and management of data management and sharing. Who do you recommend be the person or office overseeing compliance with the DMSP from what was accepted and approved by the IC? How scientific technical does this compliance check need to be? Does this need to be vetted by a high-level technical scientific officer or reviewer? I can provide the answer that on that one that we're providing at our own institution. And, you know, based on some of the samples that we've seen, that oversight really belongs within the research team. And, you know, there might be some samples out there that make it look like maybe there's something else that's expected. But, you know, from a central office perspective, in much the same way that, you know, we're not in a lab and we can't say whether the science is getting done as it was proposed or, you know, comment on that. It's also very difficult for any kind of a central office to do compliance checks on the data management and sharing. So that, you know, really needs to live with the research team, maybe regular meetings with postdocs to make sure that the data management and sharing plan, does it need to be updated? Does it need to be updated in a way that prior approval is required? And then, you know, just like other outputs of a research project, the data management and sharing activities are reported on in a very similar way, or that's what we're anticipating. I don't know if that sounds right to anyone else who's willing to own an answer, but. In terms of the pilot, there's one question about what criteria we're using to determine if we have a representative sample. I think that we're just trying, you know, it won't be perfect, but we're trying to make sure that we don't have all very large institutions, that we've got some large, some medium. So we asked about expenditures, so we can make sure that we've got a little bit of a spread, a geographic spread, things like that. I don't know, Michelle, if you wanted to add on to that.
Well, from the NIH perspective, what we tried to do was get a large, a medium, and a smaller IC. And I think we have a few sprinkled in between. And what we also tried to do was identify an IC where the recommended elements are had been accepted by most. And we had one from one of our ICs where several ICs across the enterprise said we can go with this. And then we used the other larger ICs to add to those elements. And I think it's a good spread. But I do believe, to be quite honest with you, after, you know, seeing, you know, what comes back from the metrics, what comes back from which recipients participate, I think we might see additional elements as well. So, and our goal really is not to have more than one or two templates. So I'm hoping that we can stick to that. And with us, I think the main driving factor for us is that when we identified the single IC where multiple ICs said we can absolutely live with this this plan and the elements that are outlined in it, I think we grabbed onto that because we thought if you got more than 4 or 5 ICs that says that they can live with that, then that would be very helpful to the community.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Christy.
I was just going to bring up the question about participating in the pilot. Is there any kind of reprieve on anything related to the policy? And will the NOA indicate that the approved DMS plan is from the pilot? So it doesn't change the requirements of the policy. It doesn't provide any outs in any way. And the templates are really designed to still address all the elements of the policy. So, you know, not to say that there won't be additional questions, but if completed, you know, completely, then hopefully it does address those questions. And that's really what the pilot is about. What template is meeting the needs of the ICs? So it's important that they're filled out completely, and we understand that people will still be completing the sample format, and that would be the same for them to provide the information needed. And then, will the NIH program officials be reviewing these pilot templates differently? I think in some ways, the question for the ICs is, does this provide the information that I would have asked, if the sample format had been submitted? And that's the goal, to get that information on the first try and minimize the back and forth. Michelle, did you want to add anything on the?
No, I think you hit it nicely. No, I think you said it nicely. And I do believe the one thing that just going back to the question about reprieve, I think we have to recognize that, the first year is going to be bumpy for everyone, and that NIH, recognizes that there may be some recipients that just will get it right and some recipients that won't, and there'll be some in between. And that's why we're here to work with you guys, to work on the pilot, to identify the burden. I think even identifying how long it takes for them to fill out the elements is going to be something critical, because we really need to determine how much back and forth is going. Do we need to ask different kinds of questions, or how do we want to adjust if there needs to be an adjustment? But I do want to just continue to reiterate that the goal is to get everyone into compliance. And if you think about it from the standpoint of, when there is a policy that comes out and there's a need for technical assistance, this is ongoing technical assistance, because you're able to participate or able to, leverage data and information that comes out of the pilot. And NIH is, partnering. And I believe we've partnered consistently, but being at the table and seeing, how the burden or lack thereof, or to minimize ways that may create a burden or change the way we are requesting information is something that, we want to hear from the community about. The bottom line, though, I think, Christy, like you said, is that this is the policy, but how we manage and enforce compliance is going to be in a back and forth collaborative way. And I think just in and of itself, knowing that the program official will, be able to work with the PIs and help nuance those plans as best they can, so that once the plan is accepted, it becomes a term and condition. To me, that is setting the recipient up for success at the outset. I would worry if we were doing it on the back end. But if you're really working with the program officials on the front end to get an acceptable plan in place, you're looking at long-term compliance from the recipient standpoint.
So there's one other question in the Q&A that Kristen helped type out an answer to, but I think is important to also answer live, and also for the FDP community to maybe kind of take up in terms of how we can adapt our best practices on this. So is the GMS plan from the PTE applicable to the subrecipients, or should subrecipients develop their own in combination with PTEs? And I just want to put in a plug for sharing.nih.gov. There are some FAQs there that are somewhat regularly updated, and they're a great resource. And, there's one that is very clear, there should be one plan for the whole project. And if it's multi-component, it may need to be longer than 2 pages, but there should be one plan. And so, one plan is submitted by the prime institution and then would become a term and condition of a prime award. Applicants should work with subrecipients to develop the overall DMS plan, which will include the work of the subrecipients. So, this has raised a lot of questions, at least at my own institution, because of course our sub proposals are due before our prime proposals are due. So we're like, what am I supposed to do when I'm a sub? And one of the recommendations that we've been making to our community is to think about using that element 6, oversight and management, as a place where you can record your discussion about roles and responsibilities. Is the prime PI going to be, what's the prime PI going to be responsible? What are the sub sites going to be responsible for in terms of the DMS activities? That's just a great natural place to record some of that, so that when a sub might be looking at that DMS plan, or it's being attached to a resulting subaward agreement, because as Kristen mentioned in her answer, it becomes a term and condition of the prime award. It's easy for everyone to understand who's responsible for what. One of the things that maybe as a community we're going to have to think about is that, it isn't traditional that, the data sharing plans that have been included as part of submissions under the existing policy were necessarily shared with subrecipients at the proposal stage, but maybe that's something that we need to think about changing, making sure that we are sharing those plans so that if subrecipients have responsibilities that are allocated to them in the plans, they're able to budget appropriately for related expenses. They're able to review and plan for their part of implementation. And then also we don't create some sort of big bottleneck at the award stage, because that's the first time that a subrecipient is getting to review. So definitely maybe some institutional best practices on that front that FDP could work together to flesh out a little bit more.
There's a question in the Q&A regarding the potential for research being scooped when data is shared. Michelle and Kristen, is that something either of you would want to answer? The concern regarding data being scooped, or being scooped when data is shared.
I know we have some language about proprietary information, but the purpose, is that the question? I don't think so. I don't know.
It's just,
Kristen, do you see that one? I'm not seeing it. I have to take that one back.
Okay.
I think we've heard this though, and I know that there's some opportunity to redact certain data where it's proprietary, but for the most part, I think sharing of the data is that's the goal, right? To share the data. And so, are you saying? I mean,
yeah, I mean, our guidance has been, if researchers have big concerns about this, like proprietary and other things, we've advised, you can lay out any potential limitations in the DMS plan. Like Michelle said, the overarching goal is sharing as much as possible. So.
And Michelle, one of the things that you mentioned that would require prior approval was a shift in the timeline. So if for some reason, because you're saying do it at publication or do it by the end of the award. If there was some reason not to do that, that's the
whichever comes first.
Part of the prior approval. Right. Yeah.
And so if the whichever comes first and it's the unpublished data, then I think that's a part of prior approval where you would work with the program official to provide a justification. Now, I mean, that doesn't mean that it'll be approved. There has to be a sound justification for why. And if the information in there can be redacted, then I think that is what you're going to hear from the program official. But for the most part, I think the goal really is to maximize and share. So. There was another one that I thought was really good, but I can't find it anymore.
There is one question about whether the subawards or data committee or both would work on standard terms and conditions for TTEs and subrecipients to use for data sharing in repositories. And I think it's important to note that there already is the option in the existing FDP subaward templates to attach the data management and sharing plan. So, there's some existing functionality in those to include that component. And then I think It's also important to note that the data transfer and use agreement got a little shout out in a footnote to one of the FAQs from the Office of Science Policy. Woo, woo. So yeah, I do think that there may be some opportunities to think about how we can create greater streamlining in the terms and conditions for data deposit agreements, as well as access agreements. You know, we're a little worried that as more data is required to be shared, we're going to see more data deposit agreements that need to be institutionally reviewed and signed. And then as there's more data available, there's more data to access. All of our informaticists are going to be like kids in a candy store. So, I mean, absolutely, I think both of those committees would welcome suggestions from our community in terms of projects that would be helpful in this space.
Someone asked, Christy, scooped meaning unpublished data. And I think that's exactly what we're probably talking about. So we have addressed that one. And thank you, Melissa, for your response to that. So someone was asking about, can you comment on the leniency that may be granted for DMS plans in the initial stages of this policy rollout? And so I think leniency is a very charged word. I think what we want to say is that NIH is going to be working with recipients or applicants to make sure that the DMS plans are what we need and what is expected for whichever IC or research discipline that's submitting for that project. And if there's I don't anticipate there being a time where the program official and the PI can't reach agreement. But if there is a time, I think that that's something that is a discussion between, you know, the PI, the program official, and others. And so leniency here is really more about making sure that folks understand the requirements, working and doing as much technical assistance as possible, you know, to help people understand what those requirements are. I don't imagine if someone if there's a situation where, you know, the timeline change and, there's 30 days, for prior approval and someone hit 32 days. I don't think anyone's going to sound off any alarms. We just want to make sure that the prior approval comes in and it's documented. As far as it becoming a term and condition of the award, if there's areas where the institution needs to work with the POs to determine whether or not the 3 prior approval areas are hitting up against something that's being done, I think you're going to find a very good, welcomed conversation from the program officials through the PIs. But I don't think you're going to find alarms being sound off when, something doesn't just go just quite right. I think the intent is always to believe that the recipient institutions are doing the very best that you can do to comply. And these are going to be plans that your faculty and folks have developed. And if there were challenges or issues, they've developed and made those changes with the IC. And so I just feel like there's just going to be that back and forth and collaborative approach on how to manage the plans. And I do know, initially, I think I told you guys, I didn't realize like there's a lot of, I was like, oh, everybody's doing DMS plans. I mean, we've been doing this for years. And I mean, that's a very, flippant kind of way of saying it, right? Because you don't realize like a lot of folks come in under the 49999, under 500K. And so they didn't trip that DMS plan requirement. So yeah, no, I think this is something that we recognize might be new, different, and kind of, making folks a bit anxious. But I hope that the main message here is that we will work with you all to make sure that it's successful. It needs to be successful for us, for you, and for the research enterprise. And that's what matters.
Thank you.
Michelle. Sorry, go ahead, Christine.
I'd say kind of along those same lines, if the program official requires a change to the plan that could mean additional costs, is there also the opportunity then to revise the budget at that point?
So this is the thing that I've always talked about too, is that, your application comes in with a budget, and then it's peer reviewed and approved. If there's a need for additional funding, that's a discussion that is had with the program official, whether or not the budget can be revised, and working with the grants management folks to do that. I don't know that that's going to be a thing that's going to happen or be allowed always. There may be another scenario where, you get down the line and say, we truly do need additional costs to support the plan. And then, there are other supplement options that may be available, but we can't promise that because that's going to be dependent upon the IC. So I think you're going to find that those are going to be the discussions that will be had. And it would be great for me to say, oh, absolutely, you can just be, but I mean, to be very honest, we recognize that there may be some additional costs associated with it. And we would have, and depending on the IC, the research discipline, and what kinds of plans you're sharing. I know we've talked about looking at the DMP tool, what is it, Melissa, the tool from NIMH, I think it's a costing tool. I know the calculator. Yeah. And, I think you just have to, it's not the best and it's not foolproof. We understand that, but you just have to do the very best we can and budget to what you believe will be the cost. And if NIH is driving a different plan, then that's the discussion that needs to be had.
Yeah, and part of phase 2 of the pilot is talking more about these costs. So, we're hoping through phase 1 to discover, what is a successful plan and what is
and
needed.
What does that cost? That's right. That's right. And I think that's exactly why we just, that was the point, start off with those plans, identify these costs, hidden costs, because we talked about that a bit too. And then once we identify that, finding a way to address it. And it may be that, there's some other calculator that needs to be started that really captures different disciplines and that kind of thing, because I would imagine it might be different for different disciplines. So I think this is going to be a good thing. And again, it might be a little bumpy, but as with everything, you get on and you lose your training wheels and you get going. So.
But Michelle, to your credit, much less bumpier than if we were dealing with 24 different sets of guidance from ICs, right? I mean, that's the biggest opportunity to inform one or two templates, hopefully, and then costing aspects. So we're not in a perfect place, but boy, we could have been in a very, very difficult place where faculty funded from multiple different ICs would be submitting proposals with different guidance, different requirements, different formats, and so forth. So that's what we're trying to prevent.
Very well said. Thank you, Jim.
So we had just one more question come in about the pilot in terms of the length of the pilot. And I think what we're envisioning is probably a year from when we're able to kick off the pilot, not necessarily from the awarding of the first awards. So we're not really looking at for the review cycle timeline per se, but from 12 months from when we're able to kick it off. And then there was one question about subs that weren't anticipated at the original proposal stage. Speaking of DMSP flowdowns, how would these apply to subs issued after the award has been made and the data management and sharing plan has been incorporated into the NOAA? So transfer, so one of the sub PIs transfers institutions, or there's an additional sub added after the fact. And I think from the institutional perspective, you would need to engage in some of those same best practices. You'd need to make sure that you take a look at the data management and sharing plan. Does this need to be changed as a result of the addition of this sub? And then if the answer is yes, make sure that they're good with how you're going to change it, and then take a look at some of the criteria for when prior approval is required, and if it triggers, go through that process. Would that be right, Michelle?
Absolutely.
We also just generally have a shout out for 2023 being the year of open science. Woo woo.
Melissa, you make me happy when you do that.
So I'm not sure if we got to all the questions between the chat and the Q&A, but we are preserving these, and we can make sure after the fact that we get through them. Any final questions you're seeing, Melissa?
I think that we've addressed the theme of most of the ones that I see. I don't know if any presenters have any final words of wisdom or comment, or we're just all counting down the minutes until January 25th.
It will all be fine. I'm really excited about the pilot, though. I think it's a good idea. And I think it's just exactly what we needed for this kind of thing.
Absolutely. And, because it is 2 days away, what I've been telling people on my own campus is, check the FAQs. As Melissa said earlier, sharing.nih.gov. Those are getting updated, and finding those to be very helpful. So yeah, if you're still interested in participating, please reach out to us. And like Melissa said, we'll be finalizing in the next couple of weeks to make sure we hear the collective voices of the FDP community. And much more information to come, but we are very, very excited to have this pilot underway and see what the next year brings. But like Michelle Bull said, Thursday will appear on the calendar, and I think we'll all be okay. Any final thoughts? Okay.
Again, please feel to reach out, if you have questions, concerns, challenges, reach out. Various inbox we on the slide, and someone will get back to you. And I think Chris check the queues often, and we'll be here for you guys. And you have a bunch of folks behind you.
Absolutely. Okay, hope to see everyone at the federal update session starting soon. Have a great day, everyone.